I've played quite a few games over the past 16 years. A bit of an understatement, I've played hundreds of them, and that's not counting my ever-growing backlog. I've sunk so much money into this hobby that I'd be quicker to weigh it than count it, and with that comes games I somewhat regret playing, although that's far too strong a word for lack of a better one. So in my infinite wisdom, I thought it'd be a great idea to share my opinion on the internet with you lot. But before I do that, do note that some picks will be considered controversial, so I left them till the end to ease you into it. Ultimately though, I don't care. Neither should you, because it's a harmless opinion.
Heineken? Fuck that shit! Pabst Blue Ribbon!
Starting off with a game that I was initially extremely excited for, Dying Light 2 is my first pick. What a disappointment that was. I've been a fan of zombies from almost the very beginning, starting with Black Ops 1 and then seeing Michael Jackson's Thriller, then playing the Dead Islands and watching George Romero's classics. Then came 2015, along with Black Ops 3 and Dying Light. To be a zombies fan during that time was like being Tony Montana at the peak of Scarface. The world was yours, you simply couldn't get enough of it. Dying Light was a breath of fresh air. It meshed parkour and zombies together, a combination that turned heads at first, but once you tried it, you couldn't go back to other open world zombie games. You can imagine my excitement when I heard that there was a sequel being made. I placed enough money aside to buy it when it came out, and I rarely do that, so that's how you knew it was special to me. Then it released in 2022, to my disbelief. I didn't exactly like Dying Light 2. The story, whilst the first wasn't anything to write home about, was still far more gripping than this one. I can put aside story gripes if the gameplay's great, but it doesn't have that going for it either. It quickly turns into a grindfest of getting safe houses, towers and upgrades. The first had its fair share of grinding, but nothing too egregious. This one felt like too much. It were like they hired Ubisoft as a consultant. Obviously it had gargantuan shoes to fill, and they tried to better it tenfold, but in those aspirations they lost the direction, leading to delays, and in the end produced a game that I believe is devoid of the soul that made the first one so good. At least the new DLC looks alright. Maybe I would have been kinder to this game if I didn't pay nearly full price for it. The perception of value really does affect your lenience on how you rate something. Speaking of Ubisoft, what better way to waste your time than in Assassin's Creed Valhalla? One of the least enjoyable things I've ever experienced. I'd rather chew on my own eyes. I played just 3 hours of it and that's all I could stomach. I imagine this section's going to be short. If anything, it proves how important first impressions are. Going into it having previously played Odyssey and Origins, my expectations were already pre-tampered. I didn't expect Game of the Year, nor did I expect it to be the worst thing I've ever played. I expected it to be like fast food, really. And I was still let down by it. The opening scene was by all accounts pretty decent, well paced and established Ivor, yet I didn't realise that that was the peak of the game, right at the very beginning. From then on out, the story just fizzled. Not once did I actually feel like there was some weight to it, probably because I was bombarded with 1400 markers on my map immediately. It's unbearably overwhelming. Not overwhelming in the sense that you want to prevail, but in the sense that you can't wait for it to be over, or even be bothered starting it. I took the easy route and just stopped after a few hours. I didn't exactly intend on never playing it again though. I did plan on opening it another day, but every time I went to pick something to play, I brushed right by it. Subconsciously I guess I knew it wouldn't be worth the time sink to play a game that is worse than its 2 entries in every aspect. I hinted at it earlier. Some people would see the ludicrous amounts of collectibles, despise it, and still complete the game to 100%. Completionism is often a burden, unless it's a game you truly enjoy, like me with LEGO Batman 2. Play that instead. Better combat and story. But don't force yourself to 100% a game you don't enjoy. There's been a running theme so far, that being the feeling of wasting time and money, wanting to get the most out of your purchase, even at the expense of your own enjoyment, which voids the medium's intent. Deeming value is not binary. Some people value games based on the pound per hour model. Some take into consideration the art and what it has to say, and some judge value based on what's being parroted by Twitter. I don't think it's possible to stick to one viewpoint in determining value, nor do I think it's something that's quantifiable. It's a feeling after all. There is a game that I can quite confidently say has provided immense value if we consider cost per hour, but I'm not sure if it was worth it in the long run. I'm torn on whether or not I regret playing Rainbow Six Siege. It's a game that I played from right near the beginning, so that's like, 9 years ago? Right until up about 2 years ago. Throughout that time, it was my main multiplayer game, sinking hours on end in the pursuit of diamond with friends. None of us were particularly any good, however, so it was like chasing a carrot on a stick. Once it got to year 4 though, things started to go downhill, with a slowdown in operator releases of maps, reworking older maps and making changes that the community didn't like. Since it catered to both casual and esports players, they struggled to please both. No matter what they did, one side was annoyed.
This game is so shit!
Cheaters also started plaguing the servers at increasing rates, season by season. My enjoyment started tapering off massively during Phantom's site. Every change they made just seemed to be the wrong one, with no justification as to why. Saying that, I carried on playing out of thinking it could only get better from here. This carried on up until Neon Dawn, when I started opening the game less and less. The seasons where we played 100 games of rank turned to about 20, until eventually during Demonvale we didn't even bother, occasionally logging on to play the odd casual, where we don't know what else to play. Looking back at it, I should have realised that sometimes the best way to experience a game is to leave it in the past and remember it fondly, rather than returning every time a new season comes around, hoping that it has improved. As with most live service games, the game evolves over time, and no matter how much you try, the feeling it had years ago will never be replicated, whether that's nostalgia or in genuine quality. I should have left Siege for good during year 4 with fond memories, rather than having such a sour opinion on it as much as I do now, but let that be a lesson learned. Sometimes you can play a game that's so unbelievably good it ruins its contemporaries for you. That happened to me with Rising Storm 2 Vietnam. It's a game that I jokingly regret playing, as it did just that. It ruined every other large-scale shooter for me. Rising Storm 2 is one of my favourite games ever made. It's a 64-player Battlefield-esque game set in the Vietnam War. That alone, and Apocalypse Now being my favourite film, it should come to no surprise that the moment I heard about it, I were already installing it. By all accounts, it's not as polished as, let's say, Battlefield, or Squad for that matter. It's a janky mess held together by superglue and sticks, but for what it lacks in overall polish, it is drastically made up for in its atmosphere and fun factor. Every single game plays differently, local proximity chat making it feel like you're being shouted at by Kilgore himself. It's chaotic madness. It's brilliant. There's not a single other game in its style that I'd rather play, aside from maybe Battlefield 1, but even then, put a gun to my head and tell me to choose one, 8 times out of 10 I'd probably say Rising Storm 2. So it's less of a regret in the sense that I didn't like it, it was that it was simply too good for me, raising the bar to such an unattainable level that no other game in its class can live up to, and that every large-scale shooter game I play is compared to Rising Storm 2, which I don't think it'll be better than. I can already sense that a few of you might have raised eyebrows at this pick, but it's not what you think. I think Red Dead 2 is utterly brilliant. My regret is not due in any part to the game itself, but more so the time in which I played it. I first played the original Red Dead in 2013, after watching my friend play through Undead Nightmare. I'm a zombies fan first and foremost, if I didn't make it clear yet. The only Rockstar game I played up until this point was GTA Vice City. This would also be my introduction to the western genre, opening my eyes to the vast world of Sergio Leone and the spaghetti westerns. So I decided to buy it, the edition with Undead Nightmare bundled in for a few dollars more. I was hooked from the very beginning. I finished it not long after. What a game. Now you're probably wondering where Red Dead 2 comes into this equation, and rightfully so. There was an 8-year gap between the first and its follow-up, and you can tell, since the scope of 2 is massive. It's the most detailed world I've ever played. Along with this scale, came along playtime if you wanted to experience and explore everything it had to offer. Due to this, a lot of people just played through the main story, then called it quits. Some didn't even realise there was much more to do other than it. I'm not one who thinks that fast pacing is equivalent to good pacing. Good pacing keeps things interesting without getting boring. That can be achieved by slowing it down, which sounds counterintuitive, but it isn't when you consider that immersing you in the world to absorb it makes you much more involved. Imagine the cyberpunk side quest The Hunt if you just tracked, waltzed in and caught the killer red-handed. Where's the intrigue, the conflict, the build-up? There's none of it. I've seen arguments where people say Red Dead 2 is too slow, to the point of being almost a slog to play through. It's an opinion after all, but they're wrong. The me of 6 years ago would disagree with me now. Whilst I enjoyed Red Dead 2 in 2018, roughly 30 hours in, I thought I were in the middle of a never-ending story. Subconsciously I wanted it to come to a close, even though I was loving it. This shift in mindset caused me to laser focus on completing the main story, with no time to assign to the wider game. I finished it and was ready to move on, or at least I thought I was. The more I roamed around after the epilogue, the more I realised I missed out on tons during the main game. I was afraid to restart the game as it would mean committing to the time sink again, and it has stood like that since. My regret is that I ruined a stellar game for myself during a period when I had all the time in the world and no patience. Now those have flipped. To do that now would take months, and when there's new experience in games I could be playing, it always gets placed on the back burner. I do plan on finishing it again, as a lot of time has passed since then. I've gained patience and forgot a ton of the story beats and themes. If anything, I'll enjoy it more now, with a newfound appreciation for things that take the time and let things breathe instead of rushing you at 100 miles an hour. So, all being well and dandy, do I really regret any of it? It's not like I threw away my life, so no, not really. It's too serious of a word anyway in this context. If anything, it has been to my benefit, as I've figured out what games I like and don't for future reference. Some games are best experienced at different times, and some are just best left in the past to look back at with rose-tinted glasses. You need to realise that not every game you'll enjoy, and the moment you come to terms with that, you'll allow yourself to have much more fun. At least that's how it worked for me. Now excuse me, while I go play LEGO Batman 2 again.